30. There's a first time for everything. Except the things you'll never do. I rushed into the employee locker room, changed into my nicest pair of pants and a button-down shirt, and ran to the laugh house. When I entered, I saw a few people signing up on a list. They didn't look like comics, I thought. Then I realized that I didn't really know what comics looked like. They probably didn't. All wear red leather jumpsuits. I took a deep breath and tried to steady myself. Okay, this is it, Kev. I signed up. I was the fifth name on the list. The other comics had notebooks and were going over their material, writing things down. They all looked like regulars, and they didn't pay any attention to me. They were too worried about their own performances to make a new guy feel comfortable. I took out my notes and started working on my set, frantically trying to remove material to get it down to 5 minutes. For a moment, I felt like one of the regular comics. Soon, an absurdly tall dude with a shaven head, a mustache that already made him look funny, and an oversized blue button-down shirt walked in. Hey everybody, let me get y'all attention, he said in a deep voice. I'm the host, Ture Gordon. Let me see the list. He grabbed it and scanned it. He seemed to know every name there except 1. Kev Hart, aka Lil Kev the Bastard. Who's that? That's me. He then said the 3 words that will turn any new performer's jitters into a panic attack. You're on first. Shit. I wanted to ask him if he could put someone else first, but I didn't know how things worked. I didn't want to upset him or seem unprofessional, even though it was a night dedicated to unprofessionals. So I had to cowboy up. You got it. Here's how it works. I'm gonna go on stage and call each comic's name. When I say your name, you better be by the side of that stage waiting. Come up during the applause, and you got 5 minutes to do your set. At 4 minutes and 30 seconds, a red light will go on. You won't miss it, cause it'll be shining right in your eyes. Make sure you get off that stage at 5 minutes so I don't have to go up there and yank you off. That's it. Here's what I didn't know back then: amateur nights and open mics aren't really a way for clubs to look for new talent, they're a way to make extra money. Instead of waiting until people are done with dinner and ready to go to a comedy show with professional headliners, the club can open a few hours early, invite the wannabes to perform, and either charge them to get on stage or require that they bring a certain number of friends, who each have to pay a cover charge and drink minimum. When the show started, there were 10 coworkers there to support me, 10 friends there to make fun of me, 10 strangers there who couldn't give a shit about me, and 10 other comics there who were just thinking about their own sets. Ture came on stage and warmed up the audience. I looked around and saw my friends cracking up and enjoying themselves. I began to worry that everyone would stop laughing and just stare silently at me when I walked on stage next. My throat went dry and sweat trickled down my forehead as Ture got ready to introduce me. Keep in mind, you've seen none of these comedians anywhere. With that being said, let's get the show started with our first amateur coming to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Lil Kev the Bastard. I ran in place a little and shook my body to snap out of the fear and get into the moment. I repeated to myself, energy, energy, energy. That's what I thought comedy was all about. Then I ran on stage and exploded in a hot mess of over-enthusiasm. What's up, what's up, what's up? I yelled into the void. The lights on stage were brighter than I'd imagined. It was hard to see individual faces in the audience, but I could feel them staring at me, waiting to laugh. I needed to make them crack up somehow. Yeah, what's up? I also needed to stop saying, what's up? Everyone knows what's up. This here comic is about to get tomatoes thrown at him. I gotta move on. You know the bus man. Silence. You ever see that guy? Silence. Kev, you gotta stop asking questions. What's up with that guy? Shit. That's a question. The more nervous I got, the quicker I spoke. That guy like a pervert. Man be grabbing everybody, putting his dick on everybody that walks by. Ung. Yeah, man, smelling seats and stuff, cause some lady with a fat ass just sat On. Suddenly, I heard it, a laugh. No, a few laughs. Lights were in my eyes and laughter was in my ears, and the cold steel of the microphone stand was in my hands. And it felt good. Better than sex. Well, almost as good as sex. It was the feeling of acceptance, of success, of your friends enjoying your company, of a 3-point shot, of your mum telling you she's proud of you. Riding the high of that feeling, I soared with confidence and flew through the rest of my set. Then, there's that person on the bus that stinks, and when they get up for some reason you worry that maybe it's you that smells. So you smell the seat just to make sure it was them, and then all of a sudden you realize you're the pervert that be sniffing seats. More laughter, even louder than before. I got this. I went into a joke that I thought at the time was Eddie Murphy level material. It was about getting robbed by a midget. The punchline was, he didn't even have a gun. He just kept headbutting me. Again, the laughter came. Before I knew it, I was done. It felt good to have just said my last joke and made it through this trial by laughter successfully. There was just one small problem. I was still standing on stage and the red light hadn't gone on yet. I was so nervous I'd raced through 5 minutes of material in like 3 minutes. It was like having sex, then patting yourself on the back for your great performance while she's still lying there unsatisfied. Man, I'm so glad to be here. I stalled. I had to use up my time somehow. Everyone was staring at me, waiting to see what was next. The anticipatory anxiety before my set had been tough, but it was nothing compared to the awkward silence on stage. Everyone could see me struggling. I felt frozen in place. I tried to remember the material I'd removed. Okay, another thing. I was going to have to slow down the couple of jokes I had left to make it to 5 minutes. Suddenly, from the darkness of the audience, one of my brother's friends yelled, "Yeah, Kev, yeah." A few other people joined in, and I thought, yeah, Kev, you can do this. I reinserted a joke I had cut about people getting tattoos with Chinese writing. You don't really know what it means. All you know is what they tell you, and they tell you that it means all of this crazy spiritual stuff. But you're probably walking around with the Chinese words for salt, pepper, and ketchup on your back. Another peal of laughter and clapping got me back into a flow. Going slower was awkward, but the laughs actually got bigger. I'd already learned my first lesson in performing: slow it way the fuck down, because stage fright is an accelerator pedal. A couple of jokes later, the red light finally came on. Okay, guys, I gotta get off, I told them. They're giving me the signal. The room erupted with applause, whistling, screaming. It was probably just my friends being my friends, but it felt good. As I walked off stage, exhilarated and relieved, Toure clapped me on the back and said, "Good set. Good job. Man." I basked in those words. I grabbed a seat next to Spank, and he gave me the nicest compliment in the history of our friendship. Yo, man, that wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. It took just 5 minutes for me to fall in love with stand-up comedy. Everything was a high: the stage, the lights, the microphone, the nervousness. The host announcing my name, the sound system blasting my voice, the faces staring up at me, the experience of sharing the weirdest parts of my mind, the laughter and the applause. I felt like I could do this again. I wanted to do this again. I wanted to do this all the time. 31. What perfect people do. At work the next day, Alice came up to me. "You were so good. I told you that you could do it." I was still high from the night before, so I didn't hesitate when she asked afterward, "You gonna do it again?" "Yeah, I'ma do it again." I returned to the club the following week, and I was much better. This time, I was familiar with the club, the host, the audience, and how the whole open mic thing worked. My brother's friends didn't show up, but a few of my friends from work did. There were only about 20 people in the audience, but they were all laughing. As he was closing the show, Toure made an announcement that got my attention. "We're going to raise the stakes a bit." I listened closely. Even then, I liked my stakes high. Next week, we're changing things up for amateur night. It's going to become a competition, Blazing Thursday. The contest will be judged not by me, but by you, the audience. Whoever gets the most applause wins the night and a cash prize of $75. So, for your performers, make sure to bring your friends so you get that money. Though I didn't know it at the time, with 20 people a night to Raz. Amateur night wasn't making the Laugh House much additional money before its regular show. The real purpose of the contest was to motivate us to bring more friends to the club on Thursdays in hopes of winning. As I got ready to leave that night, Ture sauntered over. It seemed like he wanted to speak directly to me, which was exciting because he'd barely acknowledged me before outside of introducing me. Come to amateur night, he said. You'll be great. I'm telling you, you'll kill it. To this day, I still don't know whether he said that to everyone or not, but he was the first comedian to believe in me, or at least act like he believed in me. If it was a hustle, it worked. I told everyone who came the first 2 nights about the competition and asked them to come next Thursday with as many friends as they could round up. The other comedians did the same thing. That night there were almost 100 people in the audience. And unfortunately, because I was still the new guy, I was up first again. I'd moved some jokes around, so the set started out rough. The room was quiet, and it felt like people were laughing to break the awkwardness. But when I hit them with the midget joke, and those 100 people went from silence to laughter and hollering, any thought I still had of being a Nike rep was gone. I wanted to be on stage. It was competitive, like a sport, and I could do what I did best, be the fun, loud guy. At the end of the night, Ture brought the comics back to the stage. I was sure I'd lost. A few of the other comedians were really funny, and I was so inexperienced. Ture began the judging by holding his hand over the head of one of the comedians, and a light round of applause ensued. He moved on to the second comic, and the room erupted. Then me, and the room exploded again, but it didn't seem as loud. I felt certain the guy before me had won, and I resolved to come back and keep trying. When Ture got to the end of the line, however, he kept me and the guy next to me on stage and did a final clap off. Not only did all my friends applaud, but other people's friends applauded for me too. These were people I'd never met before in my life, and they were rooting for me to win. I looked around the club and tried to take it in. A moment later, Ture announced, "Congratulations to this Thursday's winner, Lil Kev the Bastard." I pumped my fist into the air and did a victory lap around the stage. It was the third time I'd ever performed, and I'd beat out all the veterans. Maybe I did have a talent for this, or at least a lot of loud friends. That day, I became a professional comic. I was amazed that I'd gotten paid to do something I genuinely enjoyed. I couldn't stop talking about it on the train ride home. Me, damn, I won. Like, I won. That's crazy. I can't believe I won. Spank, yeah, Kev, you won. Me, and I just started doing this. How'd I win so fast? I gotta think of some more jokes. Hey, though, you think I was really that good? Spank, yeah, you was alright. Me, you think I won cause I was the best there, or just cause y'all were really loud? Spank, cause we felt sorry for you. Me, no, come on, for real. This is important. Spank, come on, Kev, stop talking about it already. I was obsessed. All week I worked on new jokes to add to my set, most of it hacky, obvious stuff, like about the differences between the way white and black people dance. The amateur competition kept me and the other comics working hard in bringing our friends. I reached out to practically everyone I knew in high school. I even had my customers coming in. It was like a friend's arms race among the amateurs. My performance at the second contest was stronger, and I won again. At the third contest, I was no longer first on stage, I was in the middle of the lineup. When Ture announced me, he said, "This guy here has been tearing up the amateur scene. He's won 2 back-to-back Blazing Thursdays." When I walked on stage, people in the audience were no longer bracing themselves to feel sorry for me, but getting hyped for a good time. After my third win, I stopped doing triple shifts at work and started taking comedy more seriously. I went to the club on nights when I wasn't working to watch professional comics. The first thing I noticed was that they didn't just think about their jokes, appearance was also important to them. Like Eddie Murphy, they had a look they'd crafted for the stage. As I sat there in the club night after night, I thought about who I was and what kind of image I should be creating. Should I buy a suit, a leather jacket, a sports jersey? Each of those items conveys a specific personality. Which should mine be? After winning my fourth contest, I spent the money I'd accumulated on a safe look that I thought would appeal to everyone: thick Banana Republic dress, slacks, black dress shoes, a stiff dress shirt, and a J. Crew sweater. I thought I looked like a professional comic, but in retrospect, I looked more like a deacon's son. Of course, how you feel your look is more important than how you actually look anyway, because it's all about your attitude. And I was Lil Kev the bastard. I was all attitude. On the 5th week of the competition, Toure scheduled me in the headlining slot as the last comic of the night. When he introduced me, he seemed as excited as I was. Yo, it's been 4 weeks in a row. Somebody's gotta stop him, man. Is this gonna be the week? I felt like I was a big deal now, and I grabbed the mic with confidence. I was getting comfortable with my set, so instead of just trying to remember my material, I was able to think about pausing, pacing, facial expressions, and being more animated with my body. Most exciting of all, because I was a familiar face, I started making friends with other amateur comics and feeling like part of the scene instead of an outsider. Acceptance is a drug as powerful as crack. By that time, the crowd had leveled off at about 80 people, but they were all ordering drinks and spending money. After I won again that night, Toure sat down next to me and said, "Hey, I'm going to Virginia tomorrow. I got a show up there. You wanna roll?" Instantly, the world got a lot bigger than the Laugh House. I hadn't even considered the fact that there were other comedy clubs to perform at. I could be doing this every night. However, I can't, I told him reluctantly. I gotta go to work. All right, I feel you. He walked away from the table and I sat there alone, watching the blue back of his shirt recede into the club, feeling like I'd just blown a big opportunity to make something of myself. 32. K. Hart quits his day job and never looks back. Actually, he kind of goes back. But that's in chapter 98. After I won my 6th contest in a row, Toure approached me again. "Hey, I got a gig way out in Westchester, Pennsylvania, if you wanna come with me this week." Man, I still got this job, you know. I know. You can say no to someone once and they may ask again. You can even say no twice and get another shot. But 3 no's and you're definitely out. I was 1 no away from being out. The job I'd loved so much was suddenly a prison. There was a whole world of comedy clubs out there I was missing out on. If there were other amateur contests like this one, I could make a good living doing this. But even if there weren't, I could still make my rent and food on $75 a week. I was so confident, the possibility that I'd lose a contest didn't even occur to me. Here are some of the things people might say to you when you decide to pursue your dream. I know you're excited about this right now, but you can't make a living at it. Are you sure this is what you want to do? Take some time and really think about it. Don't quit your day job. Stop dreaming. Be realistic. There's no money in it. It's not a smart choice. There's too much competition. You're not good enough. Many people will tell you to ignore these doubters. Others will tell you to listen and then prove them wrong, which worked for me in those first shows. But I'm going to recommend something better that I learned much later. Don't invite them into the conversation. You already know what you want to dedicate yourself to, so you don't need to ask for their approval. There's no need to seek external approval when you already have internal approval. That's why, even though I had sought everyone's advice about performing at that first open mic, I didn't ask anyone about quitting City Sports to become a stand-up comedian. I just did it. It was all or nothing. I was ready to give this my all, and I didn't want anyone saying anything to me otherwise. I was going to be a professional comedy amateur. Even though I'd made up my mind, there were a few people I had to share that information with, people who made me nervous as hell, the managers at City Sports and my mom. When I gave my 2 weeks notice at City Sports, the manager, Brandon, who'd been to the club to see me perform, couldn't believe what I was saying. Manager: Kevin, are you serious right now? You want to be a comedian? Me: yeah, that's exactly what I want to be. Manager: a comedian, Kevin? What's going on? You have a career here. You're good at it. There's room to grow. You could get to corporate and be making $75,000 a year, and you're just going to throw it away because you won amateur night at some comedy club. Me: pretty much. Manager: I'm worried you're letting this go to your head. You know, you're headstrong, that's a problem. I didn't say okay this time. I said, me, I know what I want to do with my life. I quit. Less than 2 months before, these same people had been encouraging me to try comedy because I was so funny. Today, they were telling me to stop doing it. They believed in me then, now, suddenly, they didn't believe in me. I couldn't understand it at the time, but later I thought about it. The problem is, many people want you to do things up to the point where they lose control of you. As long as they're still your boss or mentor or partner or good friend, it's fine. But if it starts pulling you away from them or making you more successful than them, or keeping you too busy to see them as much, then your dream can become their threat. I knew who my real friends at the job were, people like Alice, because when I told them what I was doing, they supported me. Keep going, she said. You're gonna make it. Go be a star. After I gave my notice, doubt crept in. It wasn't going to be easy to live off my winnings from amateur nights, especially since Toure would probably want to let someone else win, or another comedian might show up with louder friends than mine. Unfortunately, I didn't have to worry about this problem for long. When I went to the club to perform that next Thursday, they told me that the amateur competition had been cancelled because it still wasn't bringing in enough money for the club. My entire life plan was made and destroyed in the space of a week. What was I supposed to do now? 33. A license to kill. I still needed to break the news to my mum. First I bombed the SATs. Then I dropped out of community college. Now I'd left my job, abandoned my plan of becoming a night rep, and switched to comedy, which wasn't even going to pay the rent anymore. She'd sacrificed so much for me, and I was about to disappoint her yet again. I don't want to go back to City Sports, I explained nervously. I really want to give this a chance. I studied her for a reaction. She didn't look angry. She didn't reach for a hot wheels track. She didn't change her expression at all. She thought about it for a few seconds, then responded, I believe in supporting anything you tell me you want to do with your life. My eyes got watery as she spoke those words. But then her expression changed, and the mum hammer came down. But you've got 1 year to be productive and figure out how to take care of yourself this way. And if you can't, you're going back to school. Some people hate deadlines, but deadlines are motivation to get things done. My mom's support, along with that deadline, made me more determined to find another way to make a living with laughter. A few days later, my mum handed me a check for the next month's rent. She wanted just one thing in exchange for her support. She handed me a Bible and asked that I read it, since I wasn't going to church with her anymore. I stopped by the Laugh House that night and told Toure that I'd left my job, had no income anymore, and didn't know what to do. It's not just the money, I explained. I need to perform more so I can get better. That's good that you want to do that. The best way to become better is through stage time. How do you get that? You can roll with me for a little while and see how it works. It was his third offer, and this time I was able to say yes. Besides talent and timing, success is also about work and relationships. Rolling with Toure was the first comedy relationship I built, and he quickly Became a mentor. When Toure said stage time, I imagined we'd be driving to comedy clubs all over the East Coast. But he was inventing his own spots in Philadelphia, so some of those stages were just the corner hamburger restaurant or a small student center. Toure had become the comedy king of Philadelphia by doing this. He was always looking out for new places to start a comedy night. The first room he took me to was a bowling alley, and he put me on first. No one was paying attention. At the end of a joke, instead of hearing laughter, I'd hear crack, strike. Whenever you can get a hold of a microphone and be around people, it's an opportunity to hone your act, Toure told me that night after I expressed my disappointment. So never turn down those moments. For months, no one on the scene knew my name. They'd just say to Toure, "Hey, who's the new guy with you?" And Toure would respond, "He's actually funny. I'm showing him around the scene." After I performed in the smaller rooms for a couple of weeks, Toure let me do a guest spot on a weekend show at the Laugh House. A guest spot was just 5 minutes of stage time to add variety and keep the audience warm between more polished comedians, but to me it was a big deal. Surprisingly, it was easier than an open mic. The house was packed with an audience paying to have a good time. None of them were friends with the comedians. And only the best comedians were performing. The room was buzzing with energy, and the audience was warmed up and ready to laugh. I went on stage that night and killed like I'd never killed before. My mum had tried to keep me away from the violence of the streets, but here I was trying to kill on stage, destroy the room, murder the audience, crack people up and bust guts open. To this day, I still don't know why comedy is described in such violent terms. Even if you don't do well on stage, it's not called failing or sucking. It's called bombing. I'm surprised the government's wiretapping programs haven't sent a lot of innocent comedians to Guantanamo. You going to the club? Yeah, I'm gonna kill there. I'll probably bomb. Whenever I wasn't on stage, I was working on my Lil Kev the Bastard persona, trying to create the best, most fun, most high energy 5 minutes that I could possibly perform. I found that if I amplified the character of Lil Kev, anything he said could be funny. I'd say, "You ever take a bite out of a potato for no reason? Then you look up and go, 'What happened to that potato?' Everyone would laugh. Because my eyes would be bugged out and my voice high-pitched. I'd dance for no reason at all, yell at the DJ, or say whatever nonsense came to my mind. As I grew more comfortable with the character, people on the scene started to notice. Man, the new guy's getting good. This kid got potential. They weren't saying this because I was a great comedian, or even a good one. They were saying it because I was persistent, and that persistence was starting to show up in small improvements. When you're trying to make it, you're not judged necessarily by your talent but by your potential. And that potential is all about your willingness to listen, learn, and improve. The best gigs that Toure booked were college shows. They each paid a few $100, and as he noticed me improving, he began letting me open for him. I was too new and raw to be doing those spots, but getting thrown into the deep end forced me to raise my game and get better. He'd slide me $25 a day for traveling with him, purely out of kindness. That was his money. And no one was at those shows to see me. At one of those shows, there was a student from the college on the bill named Ning Lin. I was performing at his college, and he was also doing a set. I don't remember the comedy, just his beady eyes, which were always peering up at me. Even though I was smaller than him, and his quiet seriousness, like he was studying everything in life for a big exam. He knew my roommate, and we'd met a few times before, so we started hanging out afterward. It was good to finally have a friend in my circle who was also new to the comedy scene. There was just one big obstacle standing in my way: money. 34. Oiling up. Mum, where's the rent at? I was a month behind on rent and the next check was due the following day. My mum had promised to support me, but she wasn't holding up her end of the deal. Are you reading your Bible? Mum, I don't have time to talk about that. I'm late to meet Toure. I need the Rent money. Are you reading your Bible? I didn't want to lie to her, so I told the truth. No, I'm not okay. When you read your Bible, then we'll talk about rent. I stormed out of the house, angry that she was trying to blackmail me. I hated studying, and the Bible was straight up work. Thou hast also taken thy fare. Jewels of my gold and of my silver, which I had given thee, and madest too. Thyself images of men, and didst commit whoredom with them. What exactly is going on there? 2 months of rent, $400, was too much money to borrow from my friends, so it looked like I'd have to work a day job again. It was the last thing I wanted to do when I was starting to make a dent in the comedy scene. But my back was against the wall. I couldn't go to my brother for help because he was struggling with the barbershop. The building had a glass storefront so that people passing by could see everyone working inside, and every now and then, he would glimpse Dad's face pressed against the glass, staring. But as soon as my brother spotted him, Dad would disappear into the street. That's pretty much all we saw of our dad. For years. I couldn't go to Torre for a loan because we'd gotten into an argument after I went to a party one night and didn't answer her calls. So we temporarily broke up because I felt like I was losing my freedom. In that period, I started seeing someone else very casually, and one day she came up with an idea. My mom's playing around with this rent money. I gotta do something. Her, you know what? You should dance. Me, what? Her, you're small. You got a nice sized package. You should dance. They'll love you. Me, you mean strip. Her, yeah, why not? I got a few girlfriends who dance and clean up. You'll kill the game. Me, yo, I probably would do okay, huh? Her, I'll help get you right. The next day, I was hanging out with my friend Zachary and I asked him what he thought about the whole thing. Zachary was always down for pretty much anything, so naturally he responded, let's do it. You don't wanna talk about it? No, man. We should do it. Well, let's talk to this chick and get the breakdown. I called her later that day and she laid out the plan. All I need is an hour of your time every day for a week, and I'll get you guys comfortable with it. Then y'all can go out there and make a lot of money. Okay, why not? I was desperate. And Ture did say that the way to get better at comedy was through more stage time. She took Zachary and me shopping, and with my last dollars I bought a bow tie, a G-string, and some Johnson & Johnson baby oil. Zachary bought something equally ridiculous. We got back to my house and class began. The first lesson was about choosing a song. I picked Genuine's Pony. I think Zachary went with Usher's You Make Me Wanna. Quote. Lesson 2 was about choreographing a dance routine. I started working on some moves while Zachary just stood there. What's your move? She asked him. I only wanna do bow-legged stuff. She gave him a funny look. You know you been looking, he shot back, completely serious. Lesson 3, oiling up. We went to the bathroom, doused ourselves in baby oil, and changed into our stripper outfits. When we emerged, we looked more like victims of a fraternity prank than hot strippers, plus we'd gotten oil stains all over our bow ties. You sure this is how it works? I asked. She looked around the house for something. This right here can be the girl. She placed a wooden stool in the middle of the room. Then she put on Pony. I started gyrating my body and running my hands over my chest to the song. It's cool, Zachary, you can dance too, she encouraged him. He joined me in the middle of the living room. The lights were blazing. Genuine was pumping, and we were glistening. Zachary got to the stool first and started humping it while I stood behind him. Shirt off and oiled up, trying to do the R. Kelly move where he bends all the way backward until he looks like a table with 2 legs. It doesn't look sexy now, and it probably didn't at the time, especially cause I didn't have half his flexibility. When Zachary finished doing the chair and I finished doing the table, we looked up and saw my brother, my roommate, Spank, Neen, and my upstairs neighbor staring at us. The music was so loud we hadn't heard them enter. And now, with one exception, they were doubled over, breathless with laughter. That exception was my brother, who was pissed off what the fuck is going on in here. He always felt protective of me. Throughout my life, he was constantly trying to help me become what he considered a man, and I let him down on that front pretty regularly. What does it look like? I yelled back, in my G-string and nothing else. We're working. Working at what? Laugh all you want, but you'd do it too if you knew how much money strippers made. You think anyone's gonna pay to see that shit? Man, the only thing I pay for is the therapy to get that fucking image out of my head. That was the end of my stripper days. 35. Salvation. After I was 2 months late with rent, the landlord put an eviction notice on our door. I visited my mum, begging, "Mum, I just got an eviction notice. I need to pay the rent. I'm serious. Have you read the Bible?" This time I lied. When your survival is at stake, morality is the first thing to go out the window. Yes. Don't lie to me, Kevin. Talk to me after you've read your Bible. She must have had a sixth sense. Mum, whatever, I don't want to talk about scripture. Forget it. I slammed the door shut. I was so angry that she bailed on her part of the bargain. But of course she hadn't. It was me who'd broken my word. I got home and figured I'd open the Bible and pray for guidance. Maybe Mum knew something I didn't. I pulled it out of a drawer and opened it for the first time since she'd given it to me. A stack of rent checks, all signed and dated for the first of each month for the whole year, fell out. She'd kept her promise after all. I felt so low and ungrateful. She was a tough woman and always true to her word. I'd never expected to fall on such hard times. Once I finally found my passion and made a plan, I thought I was set. That's how it works, right? You make a plan, work hard to execute it, and then succeed. But I've learned that I'm not the only person in the world who's making plans. Everyone is reaching for what they believe is a better future, and not all of those futures are in alignment. Some people's plans conflict directly with the plans of others. In a basketball game, both teams are planning to win, but only one is going to succeed. Now add to this mess of plans the forces that are beyond our control. There is so much that is greater than us, whatever you believe. So while we get to choose the roads we take, we don't get to know where they lead. Acceptance, then, is knowing that when your plan fails, or your road dead ends, it means a bigger plan is at work. And I'd rather be part of a big plan than a small one. So I cracked that Bible open and read the entire books of Genesis and Exodus on the spot. Then I called my mum and apologized with all my heart. "Mum, I'm so sorry. I just began reading the Bible and I found my salvation." "That Bible will serve you better than those checks," she replied. "You're going to need to stay faithful if you want to succeed on your journey." My mum had a funny way of doing things, and even in my darkest days, she was able to turn the hard times into a lesson or cast a positive light on them. Even when things got negative in her own life, she stood tall as a model of optimism and resiliency. Out of respect for her, I started reading scripture every day for years after that. And pretty soon, a miracle happened. Life lessons from apprenticeship. You need a teacher, because those who can't do teach. So if you wanna learn something, go to someone who can't do it. Damn it, I think I wrote this one wrong.